Hello there. My name is Dr. Salim Javed. I am an associate professor at the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication at Linga's Lalita Devi Institute of Management and Sciences. As you know that we have been talking about different story formats under the title of Understanding Cinema. But what is the need to understand so many story formats? What is the purpose of these so many story formats? If you remember that we have been talking about the Black Snyder beat sheet, then we talked about Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, which is like a very important guidebook which is divided into three parts, like the departure, the initiation and the return. Then after that we talked about Christopher Vogler's The 12 Stages of Hero's Journey. For your understanding, again, it has been divided into three parts, which is like Act 1, Act 2 and Act 3, which is like from moving ordinary world to special world and coming back to ordinary world. Then we talk about Dan Harmon's story circle, which is very not that difficult to understand, but comes handy when you start using it, and when you start using it in terms of your screenplay writing, and what magic it spells is beyond imagination. Unless you don't use it, you don't understand the use of it. Then we talked about, if you remember that last time we talked about Denwell's 7 plot point story formats. Now, very interesting thing about it, it is like just any other story format which has got different stages and which talks about that what each stage mean. But what makes this Denwell's 7 plot point story structure unique is its non-linearity. Now, what do we understand by non-linearity? It means like if you can see it on your screen, that it has this sort of a format that on stage 1 it talks about hook, then on stage 2 it talks about plot turn 1, then pinch 1, then midpoint, then pinch 2, then plot point 2, and then the resolution. This is like any other normal story format. What is so unique about this specific format? As I said, the unique point of this format is its non-linearity. So like suppose if I say what is a non-linearity means, that like suppose we understand alphabets when we are young, and when we learn all the alphabets, it's A, B, C, D, then there is a chronology, like we start first A, then B, then C, and then D, and this is how linear, this is the linear format of understanding. But what if I tell you that the unique, that the very different point about this is that you start with the end, you know. In this story format, which is Denwell's 7 plot point, we start with the end, which is basically the last stage is called the resolution. So what makes this 7-point story structure unique is the non-linearity of the steps to be followed. What I mean by the non-linearity is that it does not start with the beginning point called hook, rather it starts with the end point called resolution. For some, and especially for me, when I read it for the first time, it was very surprising. So why it has been made non-linear in the way it why it makes itself different from other? Now, there is a very common sense which says that according to the formula, to start the story, one must know the end of story. Now, this is something very unique, very different about this format, that it says that before you start, you should know the end, So sometime you must have heard this expression that the end is the beginning, So this particular format literally follows this line that the end is the beginning. So it does not start with hook, rather it starts with resolution. But what is the need to understand, or what is the need to solve the end first as a first step when you are writing your story? There must be some logic behind it, otherwise this would not have been such a popular story format. Now, whichever film that you have seen, whichever OTT story that you have seen, whichever serial you have been seeing, whichever short story you have been seeing, there is always a punch in the end which leaves you flabbergasted, when the story ends, and it compels you to think about the blow of the story on your mind. You always praise that what an ending it was, what a wonderful conclusion that the story has culminated itself into. So end is always like, because it's a human tendency that when you start seeing the film, you start enjoying the moments, and you remember, or you remember specific moments in the story as an audience. This is a critical analysis of viewing. So you remember the specific incident in a story, and when end is impactful, you always bring all those specific points together and you club it with the end, and then you pass your judgment whether you like the story or not. Starting at the end gives you a clear goal to aim all your efforts or our efforts. It's a fantastic way to write story. I'll be explaining why it is a fantastic way to write story now. So resolution, which is the last stage, it is always advisable in this specific format to start with that. So you know your story. Now when you know your story on one hand, and then the second stage, because it is a non-linear format, so on one hand you have the end, which is called the resolution, and then you have to start the opposite side of it, which is called the beginning, which is called hook in this format. Now the beginning of your story will be written once you have determined the ending. Now this is actually in proportion with what I was saying, that when you know the end, just the opposite of it will be the beginning of the character. Like suppose if I give you a very interesting example, that if you have seen Three Idiots, I'm sure that most of my students have seen Three Idiots. So Rancho is like being praised by Silencer and says, "नहीं नहीं मैं तो जानती थी कि तो एक दिन बहुत कुछ करेगा." Now that is the end. What is the beginning? Technically that is also a non-linear, but if you see that Silencer never liked Rancho in at all from the very beginning, and be that the scene, what is a machine, Rancho gives an interpretation which is understood by people, that which helps a human being is a machine, and then Silencer gives a very mechanical explanation of the machine, which is being appreciated by the teacher. Now in the beginning, now this is how it is. Like in the beginning, Rancho is being hated by all the teachers, but in the end he is being praised by all the teachers. So obviously when you know your end, it is not that difficult. I'm not saying it's easy, I'm saying it's not that difficult to chalk out your beginning of the story. So it is always you have something to compare about. There is a yardstick against which you are judging what you are writing. So that's why it is said that the beginning is also the end is also a beginning. So when you know your end, it is easy. It is not that difficult. I will not say it's that easy. I will say it is not that difficult to chalk out your beginning. Now once you have determined what is your end, so it is easy to write about the beginning. Now locating your story's protagonist and antagonist at the outset is essential. If you know how the story ends and what happens to your characters, you will not have trouble making a choice. Now this is something which is essentially very important to understand, that sometimes it becomes very difficult to give a path to your character. Doesn't matter he is an antagonist, he is a protagonist, he is a round character, or he is a cliche. It does not matter. I'll be talking about different sort of characters in this specific video, because other than the story formats, Dan Wells also talk about 5 essential elements which are like, and in that element we'll be talking specifically, or rather at depth, about a very interesting topic, which was like, for me when I was studying in college, it was very difficult for me to understand, and that is called subplot. It is like through definitions you can understand what is a story, what is a plot. But understanding subplot is something which requires a lot of effort, because there are no good examples which differentiate between plot and subplot. Theory wise it is like absolutely fantastic. You read a lot of literature and then you understand that this is what called plot, this is what is called story, and this is how you should weave your subplots. Now I was talking to one of my friends, and that is where I was saying that stories are not created. And he was like, he also is in the same field, he's also into writing stories, and we talk a lot about how things should be done. So I proposed an idea that stories are not created, and which actually infuriated him he was not very comfortable with the statement. Then I said there is a difference between when you create stories and when you weave stories. Stories are to be woven. So this is so all these things, like story is a broader structure, which is like the French theorist that it's a pipe, okay, and it becomes very difficult to understand what is a pipe. In the ideal world, that this is a pipe, but all the pipes which are similar to pipes or different sort of pipes are also pipes. But is it a pipe? So surrealism creeps into, and I will not get into that in that debate. But story is a broader format. Plot is basically the part of it, and if I may say so, subplot is the design because of which you actually like a piece of cloth. The design of the cloth attracts you first, then you see the stuff, then when you're touching it, it's the plot, and when it overall falls into your aesthetical understanding of that particular cloth, you buy it. So it is not only one element, that is a driving force. There are a lot of things, like story is the overall structure, is the the aesthetics of that piece of cloth that you're going to buy. Then you also check the stuff, so when you touch it, you feel it, and it feel wise it also it needs to qualify as per your choice, and the design itself, which is like subplot. So this is how our choice works. This is how our perception works. Albeit in terms of perception, in coming videos I'll be talking about Gestalt theory, and which will help you understand the nature, the formula of how we see. We see through our eyes. There is no denial of this fact. But what is the process of us seeing a specific thing, perceiving it, understanding it, recognizing it, and then using it? So there is a process. There is a process which talks about our choices, which may look very simple to us, is basically a very complicated process. Now, as we have talked about the end part, then we talk about the beginning part, like resolution, hook. Now from resolution to hook we have jumped. Now from directly hook, we are not following it linearly. Now we are jumping from hook to midpoint. Now midpoint is like very sometimes we call it interval in India, but midpoint is basically the middle of the story, which is basically taking your character from reaction to action. So midpoint is always about action. A very crucial phase of the story where your character has done something profoundly important to the structure of the story. Now, as we have prepared our story's beginning and end, now we can go on to the story's midpoint, knowing that the midpoint marks the moment when the character goes from reaction to action, and which is very crucial for the story. In other words, they decide to take action in an effort to end the tension between them. So midpoint is always very crucial in terms of writing also, because you need to leave, in terms of Indian style of writing, you need to leave your character, you need to leave not only your character but audience also in a state of awe, and in a state of surprise, in a state of wanting more from the visuals, wanting more from the story. I give you 3 examples that how you can leave your audience in a state of awe, wanting more, and desire that it should be unfolding immediately. I give you 3 examples. One is Bahubali. If you remember that a lot of people are establishing the statue of Bhallal Dev, but then it starts falling, and then Bahubali comes. Though he has put a cloth on on his face, but when he starts pulling, and when the that piece of cloth floats in the air, suddenly there is a enchantment of Bahubali, 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 and suddenly there is a crescendo which is building, and audience is like, because I have seen it in theater, so I'm like, you're hearing from horse's mouth, and you have also experienced that people were literally reacting to the situation as if something of such a importance is being established. People were elated, they were cheering, they were whistling, they were clapping, and by the time this statue of Bhalal is established, and on the top of Bhalal's statue they superimpose the image of Mahendra, people were like at the height of their excitement, and there is where comes the interval. So people want more. So when they are leaving, when they are leaving cinema hall for getting fresh or buying something to eat, they are talking about that moment, and that is what pulls them back again in cinema hall to see the bad guy close in, sort of a thing, which I was talking about, Black Snyder, and the bad guy comes in full force, but they give it some time. I'll also explain the psyche of interval in Indian filmmaking process, and why it is important, and why in different countries we do not have interval and things like that. So I'll talk in some other video. I'll talk about the psyche of interval in Indian cinema also. Now, this is the first film. Now, the second example can be that throughout the film they are searching for Rancho, and but by the time he comes back, they find that the guy that they have been looking in the first half of the film, though they find that guy, but he's not the guy that they are looking for. And audience is like, what? Are we played off in the first half? Are they, they have an element of whether they know who is Rancho, the person who is being shown, and the person they finally meet, there is a stark difference. They are two different individuals. So when they go again to get fresh and buy something which is shows the footfall, I'll be talking about footfall also, that how it works in terms of cinema business. Then they're talking about it, and the moment you are excited, the moment you are talking about something, in the interval period, you are actually establishing a relation with the second half. So this is how this midpoint always works, that when beyond reaction, you have passed the stage of reaction and you are moving into action, so this is how it helps. Now, resolution we touched first, then we talked about hook, which was the second stage, then we talked about the third stage, which is the midpoint. Now let's talk about plot turn 1 and plot turn 2, and then we will be talking about pinch 1 and pinch 2. That is the succession in the form of non-linearity. Now, when we talk about plot turn 1, which is basically inciting incident, like inciting incident, what does it inciting incident means? I have if you see the exact meaning, it becomes like Uksana or something like that. So it becomes very easy that you have something is compelling you to move forward. But when the writing is not about understanding words, it's about creating meanings. So the first plot turn in the story is meant to get you from the hook to the middle of the story. So from hook to midpoint, this plot turn 1 is in the first half technically. The goal here is to throw the character off off their routine, introducing a jarring circumstances that the character must deal with. This is typically where the writer introduces the story's central conflict. Now, there is always, like, suppose if I say, it throws the character into the story's central conflict. Now, there is a term called MacGuffin, MacGuffin, MacGuffin. Now, this is a term which is like not very popular, but it is basically an object technically it is basically an object where your character or the story or your protagonist or antagonist is after, and they want to achieve it because it will make them happy, or it will make them powerful, or it will make them it will make them the wish they have been aspired to get from a specific source of power. So that is called MacGuffin, MacGuffin. Now this central conflict, when we talk about MacGuffin, it is a device which was used by suspense king Alfred Hitchcock, and then later generation, like especially Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, they used MacGuffin in a very different sense. Sometimes people argue whether the kind of MacGuffin Alfred Hitchcock has used and the kind of MacGuffin later generation, especially especially Steven Spielberg and George Lucas has used, there is a stark difference, and a lot of people, a lot of critics does not believe that the kind of MacGuffin George Lucas or Steven Spielberg has followed, they are at all MacGuffin. So there is a debate, but it is always good to know what debate is all about. So when you say that story central conflict, now MacGuffin says that whatever story's central conflict is, as per Alfred Hitchcock, and especially he uses the example of North by Northwest, where they are after an object which contains specific films, which contains some state secret, and the male and female protagonist are after that, and antagonist is also after that. But especially in terms of Alfred Hitchcock, central conflict, the central conflict is to obtain those films, which is in a bottle shape object, or be that you see that in Psycho also, the story starts with somebody is carrying the money, and you forget that and your entire focus goes to the killing, that epitome of a murder scene, where somebody comes and kills the girl in the shower, and that water, and how, so you forget that there is something else with which story started, but you feel like that it is now something else. Now, so from money, the entire film shifted to you or the audience expectation shifted to who's the killer. When I talk when you talk about Psycho, it is always who's the killer. It is never about the MacGuffin with which the story starts. Or same thing goes with the North by Northwest. You forget that the journey was about to catch hold of the secret, but rather you get into the relationship of the hero and his love interest, and you find out, okay, this is something which should be reach its destination, forget about the secret that the story starts with. So one end of the MacGuffin says that this is what during the journey you forget about what is the story started with, or then you reach to a different destination where you are saying, okay, this is more important, forget how the story started, but this is more important, and this is how it should be achieved in the process. We'll be talking more about it. Thank you very much.